So there is a woman living in Paris right now who works fewer hours than you, takes almost 7 weeks off a year, reads more than double the number of books you do, and spends her weekend actually enjoying her life instead of recovering from her job. And she is not rich or special. She is just French. So let's get into why French women seem to be living a better version of the same life American women are living, and what is actually behind that gap, and then 3 ways you can actually improve your life the French way. Let's start with the thing everyone already suspects, which is style. Walk down a street in Paris and then walk down a street in an American suburb, and you'll notice something pretty quickly. French women dress like they're doing it for themselves, and that habit comes from a completely different relationship with clothing than what most Americans grow up with. In France, style gets treated as a form of self-respect, something practiced daily, so a French woman heading out to grab bread in the morning will often still look pulled together, simply because that's the standard she holds for herself. Now in America, the culture around clothing has shifted heavily toward comfort, and there's nothing wrong with comfort on its own, but it has slowly become the default even when there's no reason for it. Leggings, oversized hoodies, athleisure, these have basically become the everyday uniform, even on days nobody is going anywhere near a gym. So the difference people keep noticing on social media really comes down to 2 different philosophies passed down through culture, and one of them treats getting dressed as a small daily ritual, while the other treats it as a task to get through as fast as possible. And this connects to something deeper too, which is how each culture treats skincare and beauty routines in general. French women are famous for their skincare habits, and that reputation is backed by something real, because French skincare culture is built around consistency, using fewer products but using them properly, and starting young. It leans less toward chasing trends and more toward treating maintenance as a long-term habit, almost like brushing your teeth. Whether that's inherently better is up to you to decide, but it is a real cultural difference, and it shapes how each group gets perceived, fairly or not. Now here's a stat that tends to catch people off guard. France has one of the highest per capita perfume consumption rates in the entire world. The country basically invented the modern perfume industry, and towns like Grasse have built their whole economy around perfume production for centuries. Wearing a signature scent gets treated as a totally normal part of getting ready in France, the same way doing your hair is, and it isn't something saved for going out, it's just a daily habit baked into the culture. In America, perfume and cologne use tends to be a lot less consistent, and fragrance often gets treated as optional or something reserved for special occasions rather than an everyday routine. Market research keeps showing Europeans, and the French specifically, spending noticeably more per capita on fragrance than Americans do. So when people say French women just smell better, what they're usually picking up on isn't some mysterious biological thing. It's simply that scent has been built into daily French routine in a way it hasn't in America. It's a habit passed down through culture, and habits are learnable. Now let's talk about something that says a lot more about a culture than people give it credit for, which is reading. Surveys on French reading habits consistently show the average person in France reading somewhere around 16 books a year, and close to half of French readers get through more than 5 books annually, with a solid chunk of the population reading 20 or more. Reading in France isn't treated as some niche hobby, it's woven into daily identity. Bookstores are everywhere, literary discussion comes up casually, and even small talk in France tends to lean toward ideas, art, and philosophy more than the weather. In America, average reading numbers land noticeably lower, with plenty of surveys putting the yearly average closer to 12 books and a large share of adults reading only a handful of books a year or none at all. To be fair, Americans spend a huge amount of time consuming information, just often through other formats: podcasts, audiobooks, short-form video. So this isn't really about intelligence, and nobody serious is claiming French people are smarter. It comes down to what a culture treats as a normal way to spend free time, and France has built reading into daily life in a way America generally hasn't. Here's another stat worth sitting with. France has produced more female Nobel laureates per capita than the United States has. Marie Curie alone won the prize twice in 2 completely different scientific fields, something almost nobody in history has managed. And she wasn't some isolated exception either. France has kept producing recognized female scientists, writers, and researchers relative to a population that's a fraction the size of America's. Now, the United States has produced more Nobel laureates overall. That part is true, mostly because the US population is roughly 5 times larger and its research funding is enormous. But once you scale for population, France holds up remarkably well, especially historically for women in science and literature. A lot of this traces back to how French education gets structured. French public schools treat philosophy, literature, and the arts as mandatory core subjects rather than electives. And every French student, no matter what they plan to study later, has to pass a philosophy exam before graduating high school. That's simply not part of the American system. So the two countries aren't producing smarter or dumber people. They're producing people trained from a young age to value different things. Now here's where the gap gets a lot harder to argue with, because this part isn't about taste or culture, it's written directly into law. French labor law guarantees every full-time worker a minimum of 5 weeks of paid vacation a year, and that's the legal floor, not some generous perk from a nice employer. On top of that, France runs a system called RTT, which grants workers even more paid time off if they work beyond the standard 35-hour week. Add in public holidays and plenty of French workers end up with something close to 7 weeks off a year. Guaranteed, no negotiation required. The United States, on the other hand, remains the only developed country in the world with no federal law requiring any paid vacation at all. None. Whatever time off an American worker gets depends entirely on their employer's discretion, and in practice, most private sector workers average around 10 days a year after their first year on the job, plus maybe 8 paid holidays if they're fortunate. So while a French woman is legally guaranteed close to 7 weeks away from work every single year, an American woman is often negotiating to use the 10 days she has without feeling guilty about taking them. This same gap shows up in childcare too, and it's honestly one of the most underrated differences between the two countries. France runs a heavily subsidized public childcare system called the crèche, where working parents pay based on income, often just a few €100 a month, sometimes less. In America, full-time childcare frequently runs over $1,500 a month in major cities, which pushes plenty of women out of the workforce entirely, simply because working doesn't make financial sense once childcare gets factored in. So a lot of what looks like French women having more balance isn't really about willpower. It's about a system that makes staying in the workforce and raising a family actually compatible. And this connects to political representation as well, because France passed a law requiring political parties to run close to equal numbers of male and female candidates in most elections, and parties that don't comply face financial penalties. The result is that French municipal and regional politics have far higher rates of female representation than most American state legislatures, where no such requirement exists at all. Again, this isn't about which women are more capable. It's about one country building structural incentives for representation and the other leaving it entirely up to chance. Healthcare adds another layer to this. French healthcare is universal, and it's funded largely through payroll contributions rather than tied to a specific employer, which means a French woman can change jobs, start a business, or take time off without worrying about losing access to a doctor. Higher education in France costs a few €100 a year at public universities, while public universities in America can run tens of thousands of dollars a year. None of this is really about who works harder, because Americans statistically work more hours annually than almost anyone in Europe. It comes down to what each system was actually built to prioritize, and France leans toward protecting time and stability at a structural level. Number 17, meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. Then there's food, which might be the most French item on this entire list. Meals in France get built around slowing down, so lunch breaks run longer, dinner rarely gets eaten standing over a sink or rushed in a car, and eating tends to happen with people rather than alone in front of a screen. This isn't just cultural preference either. French school cafeterias are legally required to serve multi-course meals made with real ingredients, which teaches kids from a young age that eating deserves actual attention. In America, the pace of daily life often turns food into something squeezed between tasks, a drive-through meal during a commute, dinner scrolling on a phone. Busy schedules create busy habits, and that's understandable, but it does mean the everyday experience of eating, something every person does multiple times a day, ends up feeling completely different depending on which culture raised you. Even something as simple as walking around a city plays into this. French cities were largely built centuries before the car existed, so daily life in Paris, Lyon, or Marseille tends to happen on foot or by public transit. Grocery trips, errands, socializing, all folded into a walk through the neighborhood. American cities, especially suburbs built after World War II, were designed almost entirely around driving, so daily movement often means getting into a car alone, running an errand, and driving back, with very little unplanned activity or incidental exercise built into the day. Researchers have pointed to this difference for years as one quiet contributor to overall health outcomes, separate from diet entirely, just from how much walking gets built into a completely ordinary day.